sibling rivalry. Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Leah and Rachel, Joseph and the boys. They're all fussing. And their families were fussing, especially when you get to the end. You have Leah and Rachel fighting, and all the boys are fighting, and it was a mess. What starts all these fights? It's a good question because maybe you've had your own sort of conflicts. Well, the book of James, he's writing in chapter 4, he says, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and don't have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. And you ask, you don't receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your own passions. We're fighting because we want something and we're not getting our way. We're not getting what we want, so we start manipulating the situation. Sometimes we yell, sometimes we, whatever it is that you do to try to get your way. And then in the end, the whole thing is it's selfish. What causes the fights among us? Everybody wants their own way and wants somebody to give it to them, and I want to make you. That's what causes fights, simply spoken. I think that sums it up pretty well. So if y'all would just let me have my way, we wouldn't fight anymore, right? So you just let me do what I want and we're good. Or maybe you want me to let you do what you want and then we're good. If somebody would first make that choice, we'd be all right. But we don't often make that choice. We dig in our heels at some point and say, that's it. I'm tired of giving in. And we fight and we quarrel and we fuss. So what are we going to do about it? If we look at Genesis, we see a couple of examples, Cain and then Joseph. Cain and Abel at the beginning, Joseph and his brothers at the end. It's an interesting picture. You know, if you don't know the story of Cain and Abel, you read about it in Genesis chapter 4 where they offer sacrifices to God, and God likes Abel's sacrifice. He doesn't like Cain's sacrifice. And Cain's all mad, his face is down, and he's brooding around, it seems. And God says, Cain, what's wrong? If you do what's right, won't you be accepted? As it is, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. So God is on Cain's side saying, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. But he's upset. So he says, hey, brother, let's go for a walk in the field. And that's what happened. They went for a walk in the field. It's just Cain came back and Abel didn't. Cain killed his brother Abel. So we see in the story of Genesis, God's creation and God's people right away, there's a propensity towards violence and anger. And we see Jacob and Esau, those brothers don't get along. Now we got Joseph in the end. He doesn't get along with his brothers. Well, he feels pretty good about himself. It's just the brothers that have the problem, right? It's not his problem. I mean, why should they get upset just because he had a dream about them bowing down to him? Come on, brothers. Of course you like to bow down to your little brother, don't you? Then he had another dream, the same thing, and they didn't like him. And his dad, he was the favorite of his dad. He had this special coat that they knew that Dad loved him more. And Dad wasn't ashamed to say, yep, he's the best one. Y'all just get to work. So there was that going on. And so the brothers, Joseph went to go check on the brothers one time. He found them, and they said, here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him. Who's to say he didn't die of being attacked by an animal or something? They ended up not killing him, but selling him to Egypt as a slave. Made a little money off of it, and they didn't kill their brother, so hey, win-win for them. And then they deceived their dad. They brought the coat back all torn up and bloody and they didn't tell him he got killed. They just showed him the coat, right? So there's this conflict going on at the end of Genesis, just like there was a conflict going on at the beginning of Genesis, just like there's a conflict going on in the middle of Genesis in the families. What causes fights and quarrels in your family, in your relationships? You want something and you're not getting it, and they want something, they're not getting it. You fuss and you fight with each other trying to work it out so you get your way. But in the end, you're really interested in yourself. You want it your way. You want everything to be like Burger King. Have it your way. But then how does that work? If I got my way all the time, then where would you be? So how does that resolve with Joseph, though? Joseph ends up nobody gets killed in the end of the Genesis. In fact, there's some differences. Cain let jealousy control his decisions and his mood. Joseph ended up letting his faith control his decisions and his mood towards his brothers. And it ended up a whole different way. Cain let anger direct his actions. Joseph let hope from God direct his actions. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. I'm going to bring God into the picture. Cain, his story ended in death and banishment. Joseph's story ended in reconciliation, bringing it back together, having a better situation than they ever had before as a family. How did the Joseph side get there? Because I want to know. Because whenever I have disagreements and frustrations and conflicts, I want to end up with faith in control. I want to let hope guide the actions. I want to end with a reconciled family and relationship or friendship, whatever it is. I want to be able to go on a picnic with you and have a good day. I want to be able to spend time with you after we've had some disagreements. I want us to be able to move on as God's people, brother to brother, brother to sister, and I want us to grow. I want that. I want the Joseph resolution, not the Cain resolution. Or the Jacob and Esau resolution where they didn't kill each other, but they didn't do anything either. They were scared of each other. Jacob was scared of Esau, but they kind of lived separate. But the Joseph solution is reconciliation. I want that. How can we get that in our broken and fractured relationships? There's something important that Joseph did. He brought God into the picture. Just like James chapter 4 starts off talking about what causes fights and quarrels, it's your selfishness that causes the fights and quarrels. Well, it ends, and it might not seem directly related, but it ends in a way that's very related to stop the fights. What stop the fights is when we let God be a part of our picture. What stops the fights is when we let hope be a part of our life. At the end of James chapter 4, he says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a town and spend a year there, trade and make a profit. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time then vanishes." So again, he's talking about selfishness. If you're looking in James chapter 4, it's bookend, being in love with the world, fighting, quarreling. Well, here he's talking about, you're just all about going and making money, but you're not paying any attention to your life. You're getting stuff, but not a life. You're accumulating accomplishments, but you don't have a life. You're still fussing and you're fighting because you're trying to spend it on what you got. So what he says is, instead of saying, I'm going to go do business and make a lot of money, you got to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. Now, when I was younger, I used to read that thinking, okay, you got to always ask God permission if you can get rich. Is it okay if I take this job and get rich? Is it okay if I go here and make money? But it says, what is the will of God? Because remember back up in the beginning of chapter 4, you ask with the wrong motives. And you're still fussing and fighting because you ask, but you're all about yourself and have no concern about what will help God or grow His kingdom or keep you spiritually safe. The questions that we ask, the reason we're fussing and fighting like Cain did, because we let bitterness get in our heart because we want something from a selfish standpoint. We haven't even considered God's standpoint. But we only want to ask him, God, I want permission to get rich. God, I want permission to do this or to do that. But God's will is bigger than physical prosperity. God's will is bigger than personal accomplishment. God's will is about salvation. God's will is about transformation of the heart and the mind. God's will is about saving people, snatching them out of the fires of hell and bringing them into a close relationship with the Father. What causes fights and quarrels is we're not really interested in salvation and security and transformation. We just want stuff and comfort. And our mind is stuck in a place that will only fight and not sacrifice. And that's the difference between Cain and of Joseph. Joseph got to the point where he let it all go. So how can we stop the fighting? How can we stop what's going on? We've got to go to God, say, God, what is your will? And really ask him, what is your will? What do you want in this picture? And it affects your prayer life. If instead of, God, can I have permission to get this job that I really want? God, can this job benefit your kingdom? God, if I take this job, will my family's souls be safe? Or will it endanger it because of something that's going to go on? God, I only want to do this, go travel here, or go take this job, or whatever it is, only if it will be spiritually safe and even shining your light somewhere new, in a new way. God, is your will that you can use me in this situation to grow? Now my mind and my heart are lined up with God's mind and heart, and now I'm ready to go. I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to quarrel. I'm not here to take anything from you. I want to give you a blessing from God. That's why I'm here. God, if I do this, can I bring a blessing to somebody? If I take this opportunity, will it be a spiritual blessing for anyone? If it's not a spiritual blessing, I don't want to mess with it. I want to be somebody who's bringing a spiritual blessing. That's what it means if the Lord's will is that we will do this or that. Because the whole chapter is, are you in love with the world or are you in love with God? When you're in love with God, your prayers change. Your fights and your quarrels will diminish. Not because other people are going to be nice to you all of a sudden, but you're going to have a different perspective. And that's the perspective I want to talk about, to move away from a lifestyle of fighting and fussing and quarreling. I want to talk about ways we can come to reconciliation instead of generational fighting. We need to reconcile like God reconciles. Joseph got it, and he brought his brothers in. What went on? What goes on with God? Let's look at Ephesians, the verse that I started reading this morning. Ephesians chapter 1, and see God. Because remember, we're made in God's image. We're made to live with God's attitude and speak with God's words because we're God's image bearers. So how do we become the people like Joseph and not like Cain, cutting people off? He's blessed us in the heavenly realms with every spiritual blessing, he said. If we continue on in verse 5, in love, he predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will, to the praise of his glorious grace, which he has blessed us in the beloved. He predestined us to be adopted. He decided beforehand that he wanted to bring us close. He decided, well, did he know how stupid I was going to be? Yes. Did he know how big of a sin I was going to commit? Yes. Did he know what kind of mess I would make in the lives of other people? Yes. And he pre-decided, knowing that he wanted to adopt you and he wanted to adopt me. Before there was any wrong done that he knew was going to happen, he'd already decided that he wants you close. He wants the relationship with you. And he pre-decided that we're going to do what it takes to make us have a relationship. He's decided he's going to reconcile before I quit messing around, before I stop sinning, before I let him do a thing in my life, he'd already decided he's going to fix the relationship and reconcile it. That's wonderful. That's great news. Now, how are you about to go do that? Are you? Made in God's image sort of people, we're made to live like God. We're taught like by Jesus to do the Jesus thing. And Jesus said, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to fix this thing. And then the question comes around when you think about the relationships that you have that are fractured or broken. Are you ready to decide, I'm ready for reconciliation when they're ready? But he didn't even leave it there. If we keep going down, starting in verse 7, Ephesians chapter 1, in him, in Jesus, we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses according to the riches of his grace, which he lavished on us in wisdom and insight. The forgiveness. He's already decided, I'm going to reconcile, and to do that, I'm going to forgive you. I'm putting forgiveness out there. It's offered. It's an offer that you can accept or reject, but I've decided I've forgiven you. This is the Jesus that hung on the cross and said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I didn't care if they asked me. I'm forgiving them. I'm throwing it out there. I'm making everything ready so we can reconcile, because I already decided I want to have a relationship. I already decided we need to be close. I've already decided that. I've already decided I'm going to forgive you. God's decided to forgive. In the constant turmoil in any relationship that you have, you've got to decide, like God did, I'm going to forgive. But do you know what they did? God did, and he said, I forgive you. I'm going to forgive you anyway. Do you know everything that's gone on? Well, God does. He's ready to fix it. We draw lines of separation that God doesn't draw. Now, God does, in certain times, tell us there's a time to cut off a relationship. That God tells us that people continuing in sin and they won't quit. There's a time, and it's not a thing of joyful or angry rejection. It's heartbreaking separation. There's a difference. God, when he separates from people, it's a heartbreaking separation because he wants them back. A lot of times we're just angry and mad and glad to see him gone. But there's a difference when we've decided that we're ready to reconcile and we decide we want to forgive or ready to forgive. It's hanging out there. And all this is done through Jesus Christ, because we see God, even while we were still sinners, as Romans 5 says, Christ died for us. God has invested in the broken relationship while it was still broken. He's still investing in you. He's still investing in the people who are stuck in their own addictions, in their own anger, in their own brokenness, in their own sin. Whether it's outside of these walls or one of you sitting inside of these walls, God is still investing in this relationship. Because he's not interested in fights and quarrels. He's interested in reconciliation and sharing blessings. And we, as God's image-bearing people, need to decide if we want to reflect that part of God's image. I know it's easier to want to be forgiven than it is to say, I'm ready to forgive. I'm ready to reconcile. I've decided that I want this to come back together whenever the time is right. So I'm going to keep deciding to forgive. I'm going to keep deciding to be ready. And I'm going to keep investing in a relationship that seems like it's going nowhere, because that's what Jesus Christ did when he hung on the cross. And that's what he wants to do with you, to keep investing. Whether you're near or you're far, he's going to keep investing. And we need to keep praying. Not a selfish prayer. God, let me plow ahead, but God, let your will be done. God, may the souls be saved. God, may the lives be transformed. God, will you please bless my enemies? And let me be a part of that blessing. When we go that far, now we're on the track of being like Jesus. Now we're on the track of being like God. And now we're going to see what God can do. Now that other side might not ever want to reconcile. There are a lot of people that don't want to be close to God. But you and God are going to go to a new level of closeness. Because you will get rid of your bitterness. You will get rid of your anger. You will be filled with a loving desire to share the blessings of God. And you will be a transformed person. Maybe if some of y'all aren't struggling with many other sins, but you are struggling with anger and resentment and bitterness. And you need for God to take those away. And you need to decide that you're ready, like Jesus, to reconcile in those relationships. If the other person would only come. You need to decide you're going to forgive because you're forgiven. And Jesus said it very clearly. If you don't forgive, you're not going to be forgiven. You read it in the Lord's Prayer in Matthew chapter 6. You read it in Matthew chapter 18. How many times do I have to forgive? Just keep forgiving because you don't need to be held hostage to holding on to a grudge. The fights and quarrels can die down when God's people decide we're going to be the forgiving, reconciling, investing in the relationship, sharing the blessings sort of people. But in the meantime, you look at Jesus, thinking about his life. He was doing all of that reaching out, but in the meantime, he was enjoying fellowship with all that would allow him to have fellowship. Don't let the broken relationships taint your good relationships. Enjoy them. Enjoy the time you get to share with family, with church members, with fellow Christians. Make time for that and enjoy that fellowship so you know what it's like that you have something to share with somebody when you bring them into fellowship. A lot of times we get so discouraged that we isolate ourselves and we're not enjoying the fellowship God is giving us and sharing with us, so we're not energized and able to do it. We need each other. We need to be talking together and praying together. We need to be studying God's word together in the building and in the homes. And by the way, we're going to meet tonight at 5. Anybody interested, we'll have a Bible study here tonight at 5 and talk more about this. But are you ready to stop fighting? Are you ready to let God bring you to a point where you're ready to reconcile and forgive and invest so that you can start enjoying relationships again? Jesus died so that we could do that. Jesus lives so that we do that. The question is, will you stop the fights and be a peacemaker now? Be like Joseph and not like Cain, not like Jacob and Esau, but like Joseph, who at the end of Genesis we finally see somebody getting and understanding what God wants from his people. Somebody who's able to move past what's happened and move into a new sort of relationship built by God's grace, strengthened by God's blessings, and shared by God's people. Is there somebody you need to decide to let God work in your life with, to reconcile, to decide to forgive? And do you need help with that? Do you need to pray together so that you walk with somebody doing that? Don't leave today without finding somebody who's going to pray with you for that relationship to be healed. Don't leave here today, whether you come down or you meet somebody, don't leave today without deciding, I'm going to let God change this thing, because we have a God who can do it. And this morning, if you're stuck in sin and so wrapped up in sin that you can't think straight and you need God to come into your life and clean you up. Maybe you need to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ, have your sins washed away, to have this new life. That's what we can do with you today and start that walk with you this morning if you come while we stand and sing.